All right, I think we're gonna get started. We may be impacted here by having an NBA Finals game on maybe the other screen in your house, but nonetheless, I really appreciate all of you who are able to make it this evening to this workshop on short-term rentals this evening. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us tonight. My name is Adam Wolf. I am the Planning and Building Director for the town of Corte, Madera. Tonight we are presenting a community workshop to discuss some policy options and considerations, and really to hear from you about your thoughts on this important subject in the town. I am joined tonight by Bob Brown. Hi, Bob. Bob is, we are fortunate to have Bob working with us on this project. Bob has many years of experience in the planning world in Marin County, formerly working as the Community Development Director for the City of San Rafael and Novato, and we've worked with them in the town of Corte Madera as well on a couple of more recent projects, including an ordinance for EV charging stations, and is also working on some sustainability issues as well with our climate action team in town as well. So happy to have Bob here today. And Bob's really going to be doing most of this presentation. I'm going to switch slides here, and I want to make sure if I didn't get I forgot. Bob's really going to be doing the majority of the presentation this evening, and we'll be introducing sort of the agenda for you tonight and getting into some topics for consideration. And I think importantly, as I mentioned, we're really here to hear from you and what your priorities are, and hear any questions and try to answer them the best we can this evening, but really trying to set the stage for a start, really at the start of a conversation with our community about short-term rentals. This was a topic that has come up in the past in the town periodically. We've had a discussion, I know back in 2016 was the last time I think we directly had a conversation at a public meeting regarding this issue at the town council meeting. It's one that sort of has come up on occasion about what the town really should do. Should we regulate short-term rentals? Should we ban short-term rentals? What are the issues surrounding short-term rentals? To this point, really, the town has relied on its permissive zoning doctrine, so to speak, that basically says if they're not explicitly allowed in our zoning ordinance, short-term rentals really aren't permitted in town. And that said, we haven't been actively enforcing that prohibition, with the exception of complaint-based or complaints that we receive regarding issues surrounding short-term rentals that may exist in town. So that's sort of the context with which this discussion tonight is really being held, and which we hope to sort of launch into further discussion about this topic, and then continue the discussion over the summer months and into the fall. And hopefully we start to narrow down some options that are available to the town and start to consider which to pursue. So with that, I'm going to sort of set some housekeeping here. The way we're going to run this meeting is, please keep your microphones off during the presentation. We will have plenty of opportunities to ask questions toward the end of the presentation and afterwards. Also, you're welcome to either have your video on or off. If you do have questions when the time is appropriate, you can use the reactions tab at the bottom of should be at the bottom of your screen. If you move your cursor to that point, you should be able to indicate reactions and raise your hand that way. Anything else that I'm missing here, Bob, in terms of, okay, setting the, all right. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Bob for the rest of the presentation and discuss the agenda and walk us through it. We are going to have polls as well that I'm going to hopefully be able to actually activate correctly and allow you all to participate that way. So.
Well, thank you very much, Adam. I really appreciate you handling the back of house here tonight. That's great. So let me go over the agenda this evening. Adam just went through the introductions and talked about what we're trying to accomplish. I'm going to very quickly help for us define what a short-term rental is. No big mystery there. We're going to do a little quick live polling to understand the audience tonight. And so, we all have a group sense of who's participating. I'll give you, oops, somebody is not muted. Thank you. I'll then give you just a few facts about the current short-term rental market in Corte, Madera, what we found. And then I'd like to spend the majority of time talking about how the various communities in Marin are regulating or disallowing, one or the other, short-term rentals. And Marin is great because we now, over the years, have had a number of different cities that have either adopted an ordinance or banned short-term rentals. So we've got some experience in how they've managed their processes. So we'll look at those. And then we'd like to return to you and just sort of discuss at a high level what you think we should be trying to accomplish here. What are the primary community priorities or objectives that we should seek to fulfill with this study? And then I'll spend a little time talking about if we go down the path of regulating short-term rentals, what kind of options are there, particularly, again, here in Marin, in terms of different regulations that might address some of those community objectives. And then we'll have some Q&A at that point. I want to make sure everyone understands what these options are. And if you have questions about any of the data or how code enforcement works with this or whatever, we'll handle those then. And then we're finally going to wrap up and return back to live polling and ask you for your opinions, whether you think the town should continue to ban short-term rentals, or if to allow, then again, what are some of the regulatory priorities you have? And then we'll discuss next steps in the process. So that will do it for this evening. And then we can all return to the Warriors game. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I think everybody generally knows what a short-term rental is, but officially, they're rental of living space in a home for stays of 30 days or less. And that rental can either be the entire home or a portion of a home, or it could even be a detached guest house. Next. And of course, the short-term rentals have really taken off with the advent of several online platforms. It started with Airbnb, but now they've got lots of competition. So there are numerous avenues for posting of these short-term rentals. And that certainly complicates some things, particularly for the town in terms of code enforcement. But there are technical solutions to that too. Next. So before we really jump into the substance of the meeting tonight, again, we'd like to get a quick survey of folks who are attending tonight, so we all have a shared sense of who we are. So if technology allows, Adam is going to launch the first poll, and it looks like he's doing that. So if you can answer these questions, we would love it. And apparently you have to answer all of them for your results to be tabulated. So if you can all do that, that would be terrific. And then we'll take a look at the results. The questions: are you a homeowner here in town? Have you ever rented your home as a short-term rental? And have you ever done that on vacation or business? And then have you had any bad experiences from a short-term rental in your area?
Just wait for a couple more to finish. We don't have any good music to play to
I can
count down.
Is there a Warriors theme song I should know?
Yeah, no. All right, we have 10 responses so far. Countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so I'm going to end the poll and share the results.
Okay, so great majority are homeowners here in town. And most of you have not chosen to rent your home out. 90% have not. And a lot of you, though, it was a flip. 90% of you have rented a short-term rental, either on vacation or business. So again, there's a lot of familiarity here about what we're talking about. And then have you had a negative impact from a short-term rental in your neighborhood? And again, 90% said no. So we only had one person that has. So maybe we'll hear more about that experience later. Well, that was great. Thank you, Adam. That was good.
All right, good.
You pulled it off.
Yep.
Next slide, please. So currently in Corte, Madera, short-term rentals are occurring, even though the town has a ban on them. And a firm that specializes in enforcing short-term rentals for city, they have software that is pretty incredible, and it continually scans listings on the internet. And they found that there were about 30 separate listings. This was back a couple of months ago. Although in truth, some of these listings could be older. They might not still really be totally active. And of course, the number of listings varies by season. So probably more around Christmas, more during the summer. But generally, what we're saying is not a ton of existing short-term rentals. And we'll compare that in a second with some other towns locally. Next. So the other data we were able to obtain from this one-time survey of the listings, the great majority are posting for rental of entire homes, 83%, 17% of the listings for either for rooms or guest houses or a part of the home, and 94% of the listings were single-family homes. There are very few multifamily units, so that makes sense given the housing stock in Corte Madera. And also interesting that the median nightly rental rate was about $268. And of course, that varies over time too, but that gives us sort of a starting point. Next slide. So how are short-term rentals currently regulated in Marin? I sort of categorize these in 3 areas. 5 of the southern Marin towns, including Corte Madera currently, presently ban short-term rentals, although enforcement is pretty spotty and by complaints. And I can assure you that when you look for listings, short-term rentals are occurring in all 5 of those towns. San Anselmo and Ross were sort of outliers. They took sort of a hands-off approach. No regulations, not a great deal of enforcement. And then lastly, the last group is Mill Valley, San Rafael, Novato last year, Marin County a couple of years ago, and Fairfax just last week. All have adopted regulations that license and regulate short-term rentals to varying degrees. Mill Valley has been doing this for like 7 years, so they've got a pretty good track record. The county recently imposed a moratorium on additional registrations in West Marin. And you'll see in a second the volume that they get, which is pretty unique. And they just felt they needed to take a timeout and reassess. So they're doing that. Next. So again, looking at the towns that allow and regulate short-term rentals. Again, Mill Valley has been doing this for quite a while. They average about 150 registrants, and they get a fairly good amount of transient occupancy tax from these, about $187,000 a year. That really obviously took a big dip during COVID, but it's bouncing back. But again, we have 7 years of data there, which is pretty good. Novato adopted their ordinance a year ago, and they're sort of a cautionary tale about if you have real expectations for tax revenue, because they only have 22 registrants. They've got apparently a fair number who have not registered that are listing, so they're doing enforcement. And they only collected $4,800 last year, so they are actually losing money on their staff time and their enforcement. So again, something to think about. I would not recommend any city go into this really thinking that this is going to be a huge money-making effort. You clearly want to at least cover your costs, but not likely to be a huge gain. And then Marin County, they have 705 registrants. So again, it's been very, very popular in West Marin. Of course, West Marin has a lot of second homes too, but the feeling was that they could really be affecting the character of the coastal communities. So that's why they're taking their time out. Next slide. So now what we'd like to do is take another poll. And this, again, is sort of high level, asking you to help prioritize the things that you think here are either high priority or low priority. Things like, giving homeowners the opportunity to rent out and make a little extra income, or making sure that short-term rentals don't affect the housing supply, or ensuring that we have a level playing field with hotels in terms of paying occupancy tax and fees. So can you launch the poll, Adam?
Yeah, hopefully you're seeing that now.
I am. And again, if you could answer all the questions to submit, that would be terrific.
And we'll give a little bit more time for this one, given that there's
a lot of choices.
I think we got 7 questions here. So okay, we got about 7 completed.
Hello, Adam.
Oh, hello.
I can't get to the second page of this. I only have 3 questions and I can't submit it.
There is a scrolling bar that's gray on the right-hand side that you can scroll down.
I don't have that.
It's a thin little gray line that with rounded edges on the far right-hand side of the poll. You see that?
No.
Right directly, if you look at question number 1 and go just to the right of it, you'll see that there's a little gray line that's next to questions 1 and the beginning of question 2, right?
Yeah.
Do you see that? And
Yeah.
if you grab that and move that down.
There's nothing there.
Oh, how? Okay.
I'm on a Mac.
Okay. If you're using a mouse, you could scroll down with your mouse.
No, I use a touchpad.
Can you?
But I'm not getting anything. There's nothing.
Yeah, when I use my touchpad, I can't scroll down either.
It's happening. Okay.
I'm surprised you don't see the little gray slider on the right side.
There's not anything there.
Okay, I'm sorry about that.
Sorry.
Well, we're happy to incorporate your comments if you wanted to follow up or actually put something in the. We don't have a chat opportunity here, but Margaret, if you'd like to just send me, we're asking high priority or low priority on each one of these bullets on this slide, and so happy to include whatever results you have in our tally at the end of the day.
Thank you.
But I'm sorry about that. So I'm going to end the poll now. We have 12 responses. And share results.
Okay, this should be interesting. So the first question about giving homeowners the opportunity to make some extra income, it's split evenly, 50-50. Okay. Making sure that STR, short-term rentals, don't impact the housing supply. Sort of a moderate response on that one. 42% say high, 58 low. Ensure the town doesn't lose out on transient occupancy tax and fees. Not a high priority for most folks. And again, I would not tout that this is a big, huge moneymaker. Ensure that residential neighborhoods aren't turned into tourist areas with transient occupants. So that's a little higher priority, 58% versus 42. Ensure that STRs don't turn into party houses, a little more support for that. I'm sure nobody appreciates the thought of that occurring in their neighborhood. Minimize safety risks, noise, trash, parking impacts. So again, the impacts of a short-term rental, again, it's a higher priority, 67%. And encouraging additional tourism, support for local business. And that's sort of split as well, 42-58. Okay, so it looks like there's some feelings on both sides about trying to promote STRs and being a little more concerned about effects. And then we'll be asking some polling questions later that really get to more directly whether you support them or oppose them, and then if you would like to regulate them, how. So let's close the poll. And Adam, if you can go to the next slide. So for those who prefer that the town allows short-term rentals, there's all kinds of options in terms of how to regulate them. Mill Valley, for example, has virtually no regulations. They have to register and submit their transient occupancy tax, and that's virtually it. Whereas San Rafael and Novato have some pretty detailed requirements. So this is a summary of a lot of the ordinances that I've looked at, but some of the things that are common, I'll go over here just so you have a sense of what's possible. Most ordinances allow either the rental of an entire home or a portion of a home, but theoretically you could limit it to either. Some ordinances only allow an owner to rent if it's his or her primary residence and not a second home. The idea there is that they would probably take a more active role in renting their personal residence instead of operating the home more as a continuous rental. So that's a regulatory option. The third one, require owner occupancy during the rental. This is pretty unique, but San Rafael requires this. And that, of course, the owner could be renting the main house and residing in the guest house or vice versa if they choose. But that obviously really limits rental opportunities when the owner has to be present. Some, but very few of these ordinances limit the number of days per year that the home can be rented. That can be sort of a challenge to monitor and enforce as a regulation. Most of these ordinances establish occupancy limits, how many guests can be at present or rent the house. And that's usually based on the number of bedrooms. Usually it's 2 people per bedroom. Plus if there's a living area that has a pull-out sofa or something like that, usually allow a couple more folks in those situations. Most ordinances require that the city be provided with a 24-hour contact phone number and name. So that's something that the police department can use if there are incidents, and also that there's a list of guest information that's posted on the site. Things like, what's the trash day? What are the parking regulations? What are the noise regulations? What about emergency and evacuation information? So those things are usually listed, and the owner must post those things for the renter. Most of these ordinances require a building inspection to check for things like smoke detectors for basic life safety things. But usually they allow the owner to self-certify and submit photo documentation as part of that process. And most require, at least most in Marin, require an on-site fire inspection for homes that are in the WUI, the wildland urban interface area. So looking at vegetation and those sorts of things. All of these ordinances have procedures for registering and revoking the registration if it's warranted. So those are some of the regulatory options. And what I thought we would do now is have a time for some questions and answers before we go forward. Just make sure everybody's on the same page. So if you do, please use the reaction tab on the bar below. If you hover your cursor down there, it should appear. And then under the reaction, there's a raise hand. And Adam will be happy to call on you.
Okay, I see one from Henning. I'm just going to do this in the order that I'm seeing them show up on my screen. So I'm going to unmute or ask to unmute Henning Cather, I think is the name that I'm seeing on my screen. You should be able to unmute and ask your question.
Hi there. When I looked at the first poll, where 90% of the answers said that they don't see a problem, I was wondering if you are really creating a solution here for something that doesn't have a problem. What I'm missing in your presentation and in your whole process is the documentation of that there even is a problem. I think we're discussing here something that may not be a problem at all. And given this, the fact that most of us enjoyed, when traveling somewhere else, enjoy doing short-term rentals ourselves, I don't know that this really is a problem here.
I'm not saying that or we're not suggesting that there is a problem. Currently, the town bans short-term rentals, period. So the real question we're asking is, is there an appetite in the community for allowing these? And then if so, how might they be regulated? And again, as I mentioned, the extent of regulation varies greatly. Mill Valley has virtually no regulations. The county, Novato, San Rafael have a lot of regulations. So again, I think, these regulations are an attempt to sort of anticipate issues before they occur and make sure they don't. You've certainly read about, I'm sure some Airbnb or other, platform party houses and the kinds of issues those have created. And I'm not saying that that's common, but it's possible. And so again, we're just exploring ideas here about if you regulated, what might be most important. We'll ask that polling question next.
Right, but sorry to interrupt you again, but you basically gave us options to regulate, but I think you should also consider that one of the options should be to completely unregulate this and step back from what the town has been doing so far. As you said, it should be really an information gathering on what should be happening, and there shouldn't be any preset opinion.
There aren't. And I tell you what, and then when you do get the next poll, you can click all of them as low priority if that's your choice. And then we'll know that, you'd really rather not see regulations in this area. And that's fine.
Well, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying so far what the data shows doesn't convince me that there is a problem. And I was assuming that you would start the presentation with showing where the problem is.
No, yeah, and I can speak to that a little bit. And I think some of this goes, back into some of the history in terms of where this issue arises from and why we're even talking about this in the first place. And so I think it's a really important observation. And as I mentioned, when short-term rentals, became a thing, I don't know if it was maybe 7, 8, it's probably 10 years ago now. But I know we first discussed this as a community at a public meeting. I think I mentioned this at the introduction in 2016. The fact is, we have a permissive zoning ordinance. And so by not doing anything currently, basically the default is that they are not allowed in Corte Madera. However, we've been sort of responding to complaints only based on complaints and short-term rentals. And the facts are that we have not received, we don't receive a large quantity of complaints about short-term rentals in Corte Madera at this time. You know, I would say there's probably been during my time here about 4 or 5 homes over time that we've heard that neighbors have issues with houses being rented on a short-term basis, and that they are causing problems. So that's really it's anecdotal. We don't have we can pull together other information if needed, but that's really the context with which to have this conversation. We are this was an issue that came up from the town council during our strategic workshop that in last fall. That was something that we thought and the town council also felt should be just discussed and brought back into the public conversation, and decide whether or not we need to address this in some way, continue to have our what we're calling, you know, a ban on short-term rentals, or actually allow them. And if we do allow them, with what regulations or no regulations, you know, that's really what we're here to do. So it seems like we have a lot of other questions. I want to make sure we get to others. So I'm going to ask Patty Stolier to, seems it was the next hand on my list here.
Thanks, Adam. I kind of had a similar question. I wanted to know, if we have 33 illegal sites, how many homes are there in Corte Madera? So to see what kind of percentage this is. And then I wanted to know, if people are not abiding by the ban, do we think they would abide by regulation?
Adam, how many homes are there in town?
Well, I think in terms of total dwelling units, I believe there's about 4,000. I want to say between 4,000 and 4,500. Obviously, I think about a third of those are rentals, which typically are not, I don't know if you want to count those or not, but typically those are not allowed to be short-term rentals through some lease agreements with landlords and whatnot. But so it's a small percentage of the total number of single-family dwellings in town that are actually listed on sites for short-term rentals today.
Another comparison to add, Adam, is Mill Valley next door. They, again, have been doing this 7 years. They have about 4% of homes in town that are registered for short-term rentals. So again, not a lot. You know, in areas like, you know, Stinson Beach or Bolinas, obviously there would be a lot higher percentage because those are real tourist destinations. I'm sorry, I cut you off, Adam. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. I think.
And is there any evidence that those that are, I won't say scammers, but not cooperating in terms of being banned, is there any evidence that if you make regulations that they would cooperate with regulations?
Yeah, I mean, that speaks to just the code enforcement responsibilities that would be placed on you know, town staff to enforce the regulations that were in place at the time. So yeah, there is some administration involved, but I think and there certainly could be tricky instances of gaining compliance, but I think this is not you know, this is being done throughout many communities, obviously not just in Marin, but throughout the Bay Area and throughout many other communities throughout the country and elsewhere. So yeah, you do need to enforce the rules if you go through the time and energy to put them in place. And I think there are different approaches to doing that, but yes, generally people will want to comply with the regulations, provided they know about them and are clearly made clear to the community.
I would also mention that all the towns in Marin that have these regulations use a service provider that I mentioned earlier that continually checks the internet for listings. And when they find those that are not registered, they then, you know, find out the address, which is amazing. They can do this instantly because those addresses aren't posted and listed. But they then know the address and they send out the initial, enforcement letters. And then after 2 or 3 attempts, if they don't gain compliance and the listing is still up, then they finally turn it over to the city. So the enforcement is certainly enhanced by some of these firms that provide this service.
But we don't use that service.
Not currently, because there's no
Yeah.
allowance for them, but the towns that do have regulations use a firm called Host Compliance that really helps with enforcement.
But it seems like for banned
Well,
situations, it would be the same.
we've been going about this really as sort of it's not an active ban, I would say, characterize it as. It's certainly technically not allowed per the zoning code. And as I said, I think it's really a complaint-based enforcement action. And that's how we've that's been the actual approach we've taken. And so in that instance, there's relatively few cases, but we're not actively scanning the internet for potential locations of short-term rentals and then going after people who may be operating them as such at this point, because that is also not a program we essentially have staffed or have allocated resources to do so. But we could obviously change that, or we don't necessarily have to. And that's sort of the conversation we're speaking to the last commenter's point, just trying to get perspectives from those on the call.
Got it. Sort of like a bees and chickens thing.
I wasn't around for that, but I hear maybe so. Yes. All right, I'm going to move on to William Gunn.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
Patty.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could remind us about the definition of a short-term rental, and particularly how long someone needs to be in the rental for it to not be short-term anymore.
30 days is the limit for a short-term rental. Anything over 30 days becomes, long-term. So for example, you could rent your home out to somebody for 6 months and it's not considered a short-term rental.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Going to go on to Kay Whitaker.
Hi, thank you. And I just want to say thank you. I am really happy to see that this topic has shown up at the city level for Corte Madera. We probably were the ones in the poll, the lucky 2 that has a short-term rental that opened up right next door to us about 1.5 years ago. It was quite a surprise. We figured it out on our own. And I do want to just make a comment that this has been very difficult for us to see in our neighborhood. We live in East Corte Madera on a quiet street. And it's been very difficult to see the integrity of this neighborhood change. It's not uncommon for us to see 2 to 3 different renters during the week. Trash cans filled, beer bottles, pizza boxes on the ground. And so, I wanted to make that comment before I make the question. I ask, if this is banned in Corte Madera, how has this been allowed to exist?
Well, I think what Adam was saying is that the town does not actively go out and search these out. But if they do get complaints through code enforcement, they will follow up with the property owner. So again, I don't know if you filed complaints with the town, but that would be the starting point to get them involved.
Yes, thank you. And we have, I will say that we have talked with some people in the town, and I will just end by saying, I do hope that this council take all of this information and take this very seriously, because I do think that it has an effect on the whole city of Corte Madera. And again, I think the integrity of our neighborhoods. So thank you again. And that's all I've got.
Thanks for sharing.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go to David McPherson.
So, Adam, I recall being at that town council meeting in 2016 about the permissive zoning. And while it was more of a comment from various members of the council. It really was, let's minimize any enforcement unless there's a noise complaint and the police can follow up. And let's watch for the next year or two and determine if this really is a problem that requires enforcement or additional regulations. And I think what I'm hearing is that in the 6 years since that town council meeting, it does not sound like there have been any calls for service to the Central Marin Police Authority. And it sounds like there's 2 or 3 or 4 discussions with the town without code enforcement actually being involved. So maybe this is more of a comment than a question, but it does so far, if you look at that data, it does look like a bureaucratic solution in search of a problem, albeit I'm mindful of the prior commenters' sense that, you know, having different people come in and out of an adjoining property changes the character of the neighborhood, although it's hard to see that that is a code enforcement problem if it's not a noise or parking or litter problem. And so I guess if there is a question here, the question is, am I accurate to say that there has not been any calls for service to the Central Marin Police Authority as a result of short-term rentals? And have there been no code enforcement actions taken?
Okay, yeah. The first one I think is a good question, and I think that's something that we should follow up on, because I don't have data from Central Marin Police Authority on that specific question, and so I just don't know if they've responded to calls for service for such types of uses. The second question I can say that you know, I mentioned before, and I think that is in talking with our code enforcement manager now, who's obviously he was hired about the last 3 years ago or so, and then I've been at my position for about 8 years now. I think it's accurate to say we've encountered about 5 or so homes that have elicited concern and complaints from neighbors. And in those instances, we try various different ways to basically to stop the use of the rentals for short term. And the first is really an educational component. And so that does, I mean, that's what our code enforcement team starts with in all code enforcement cases, is really the educational component. And that does help, seem to help, at least for a period of time. I could say our experience is that there are certain owners that seem to have maybe short-term rentals in multiple locations throughout, not just Corte Madera, but maybe Mill Valley as well. And it seems to be I know of one property owner who has multiple homes and seems to take seems to have a small business in a sense in renting those out. I've personally spoken to that individual on a number of occasions, and that has led to the owner renting those homes out or portions of homes out for more than 30 days once they've recognized that and advertised for that, and have not received complaints again on those particular properties. So that's what I would say in terms of our experience. But I would hold off and drawing too many conclusions until we can get, you know, more additional information in that regard.
Thank you.
I think it will be interesting to see if the police department have complaint data that's differentiated between short-term rentals and regular home rentals or regular homeowners. So, but we can definitely look for that.
Thanks, David. Going to go to Margaret Bendel.
Good evening. I think this is a particularly important topic, and even though it doesn't affect as many people as in other places like Mill Valley, if the person or if the home being rented out on a short-term basis is next door to yours and you're woken up in the middle of the night by noise, then it's a very important topic. And the thing that I am thinking about is that it seems to me that people are using the option of short-term rentals as a moneymaker, a small amount of money or a large amount of money. And I think that because it's kind of a business for them, they ought to be required to have extra insurance. And rather than the town getting money from it, perhaps there should be something like a victims compensation fund set up for the people in the neighborhood who are bothered by it, who have to pick up the trash around their house, who have to be sure their kids aren't interfering with or in the street when traffic goes by or the parking situation gets bad. People ought to be compensated rather than the town being compensated, because right now it doesn't seem like the town's putting much of an effort into enforcing what's going on. That's my comment.
Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. Okay, I'm going to ask Laura von Waldenberg to unmute and speak, please. Hi, Laura.
Hi, Adam. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. So my question is for Mr. Brown. David, is that your first name?
Bob Brown.
Bob. Hi.
Hi.
Can I really like to hear what Miss Whitaker said about her experience over in East Corte Madera. And I wanted to give you our experience in our neighborhood and ask you if you could put the slide up of the options that are there for regulating short-term rentals. Because unlike some of the other commenters, I personally don't have a problem with short-term rentals. I mean, it's just kind of part of our society now. We all go on vacation and get Airbnbs and stuff like that. So that stuff doesn't really bother me. But what happened in our neighborhood is someone bought a house for $1.3 million, remodeled the entire house without a single permit, and now rents it out for $750 a night. So they've taken a fairly affordable house out of inventory, not followed any of our town regulations for remodeling, which residents, I know from experience, are held to. So I'm wondering, of these options that you kind of have listed out, where does an experience like that fall? I'm not opposed to short-term rentals. I feel like they're kind of here to stay. But how do we weed out a complete, taking advantage of the process or of the town or whatever you would say? What would you recommend of these options?
Yeah, I'm not sure you do. I think what you've said is, somebody improved their home, which is fine, and then decided to use it for short-term rentals. Again, that's not allowed. But if it was, none of these would really address that. I think your main point is, what's the impact on the housing market, right? Yeah. And once you allow them, it does impact. I think that the percentages we're talking about are low in terms of, how many people really will choose in Corte Madera to rent. I think it's relatively low, but again, that is a concern that some communities have had, and I don't think there's any real silver bullet to that. You can not allow rentals of deed restricted affordable units to keep your affordable, housing stock in place. But I'm not sure there's a way to address the. Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the things that actually came up in 2000, and this is going back some time, but in 2016 was, I thought spoke to this a little bit, in that potentially you could, only allow for somebody's primary home to be rented for short-term rentals. And if it wasn't a primary home and essentially somebody's second home, that would not be permitted. And I don't know if that's really been done elsewhere, but it sort of sparked some head nods back now several years ago when that came up as, typically if it's someone's primary home, it's not going to be a full-time business where they're just revolving people through their houses on weekends and they're somewhere else. So that, we'd have to think about how to get that information about primary homes, but that maybe would speak to what you're talking about, is it's not a full-time thing, it's a part-time thing. Is that, I don't know,
Yeah.
Laura, if
that was what came to mind too. Because I mean, I also love the idea of, like, you go on vacation and you should be able to rent out your house, or you're an older person and you have 3 empty bedrooms. You should be able to rent out those bedrooms. But the using it as a business is, you're right, it's not really that common, but when it does happen, it's kind of terrible. And the other question I have about that is how it kind of relates to building codes. So, and I know this is just our neighbor's experience or our experience with our neighbor, but what she did is, she has multiple houses, but when she's at this house, she converted her garage, again, without any permits. Love to know where that's going, but a different conversation. So she converted her garage into not like an ADU, but just like a room that she could sleep in while she's at the house, and the rest of the entire house is rented. So I think that was a long way of saying, yes, I agree. Like, it's not her primary residence, it's her business.
Thanks, Laura. I didn't understand that she was an absentee owner. I would say, and I'm sure Adam would agree, that issues related to unpermitted construction, particularly in sleeping rooms, is something that I'm sure the town takes really seriously and enforces pretty rigorously, because again, that's a real health and safety concern.
Yeah, when I complained about, well, first of all, it wasn't me that complained, it was our neighbor, and they asked me to call. But yeah, they have all new electrical and gas and all of that, which you're right, like someone that's sleeping there doesn't know was not done without permits.
Right.
Okay, good. You've answered my question, so thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to now go to Sean Randolph.
Thanks very much. Just had a procedural question. I don't have a question. I got a comment. We're sort of mixing questions and comments here. If I have a comment, should I wait for later in your agenda? I don't want to mess it up.
No, go ahead.
Appreciate that question.
You have the floor.
Okay, thanks. So I don't have a problem with short-term rentals. I agree with what somebody else said, that it's kind of part of our culture in our society now, and I think we ought to have the flexibility to rent out rooms or houses if we choose. But I think there is definitely a place for appropriate regulation. But my specific question or comment, which makes me supportive of the idea of the town opening this up a little more, is that in our case, we have a home up in sort of Chapin Park area, and we're on a hillside, and it's a 2-story house. And as the slope goes down, there's a rather large unfinished space underneath our house that with the stairway down to it that could be built out as another room. And actually, when we purchased the home 20 years ago, I think the former owners actually had a permit, and they gave us, here were plans that had been developed for how to build out this room downstairs that somebody could live in, maybe a caretaker. So our son and his family don't live here. They live in the UK. We kind of hope they're going to come back sometime. It'd be a nice base for them. Since housing costs are so high here, at least till they find something. And so it's occurred to us to build out that room with the idea it would be used by them if they come to visit, because with their family, they're not going to fit in our little one room upstairs. And that when guests come, it's a bigger, roomier space where guests could hang out rather than a little guest room upstairs. But because it would cost, a fair amount of money to build that, it would be really nice if there was the option on some kind of basis to be able to rent out the room occasionally as an Airbnb. And I'm not saying this wouldn't be the entire house. It wouldn't be every day, but I'm thinking, on an appropriate basis, is it a weekend or several days or something a month? It would be really helpful if we had the option to have guests in that room to help recover some of the capital costs of improving. So when we talk about, renting entire houses or renting rooms, I'm all good with the idea of renting a room in an existing house at least, and having the ability on some kind of agreed basis, this is the number of days per month or days per year, whatever that might be, to have the occasional guest to an Airbnb or whatever.
Great. Well, thank you. And that, I think, leads us right into our poll. So now we've had an opportunity to have some discussion about options and where people are landing. But let's start out with the very basic question of whether you think Corte Madera should continue to either ban short-term rentals or whether you have an interest in seeing them allowed with, let's just say, some appropriate regulations. And then we'll talk next about what regulations might be high or low priority. So can you launch this?
Yeah, and I do think, yeah, I will. And it's, I just want to add on the, I think number one is really making it explicit that these are not allowed in Corte Madera. That would be a sort of different than what we thought, how we're currently operating, where we're sort of, it was a wait and see approach back in 2016 and so on for the number of years, but it would be very explicit and then putting in place more aggressive enforcement activity as well. All right, so I'm going to launch this. And this should be a short one, so hopefully you guys can start to, everyone can fill this out.
And you don't have to scroll down on this one.
Yeah, hopefully that's a good point. Getting some good responses here. Should be easy. All right, I've got about 10. Anybody else? You can raise your hand if you still need more time, but I'm gonna.
Anyone want to take bets on the results before they show?
Oh, there's a hand raised.
Yes. That's
Kurt Rousey.
Yeah, you're not allowing all the potential answers. You're saying either I support continuing to ban or I support allowing with regulation. You don't say I allow supporting with no regulation.
Well, I tell you what, in the next poll, we're going to ask you about high priority or low priority regulations. And if you just fill out low priority, we're taking that to mean you really don't think that those regulations are needed.
Yeah, I think this is maybe the third comment that this seems a little bit loaded. But
not the intent.
Options, but anyway, go ahead.
That's not the intent. Again, if we see low priority, that pretty much means, yeah, probably don't bother with those regulations. So that's
all right. I'm going to end the poll. Okay, and share the results.
Okay, so 38% said to continue the current ban, and 62% said no. And then the flip question, which is, would you support short-term rentals if there were appropriate regulations? 85% said yes. Okay, so I think that leads us then to the next question, which is what would be appropriate regulations? And again, this is the same list you saw previously. We've had some discussion and clarification. And again, the person with the Mac, I'm sorry if you can't scroll down, if you don't see that scroll bar on the right.
I'm using a Mac and I'm able to scroll, so
Oh, okay. Must just be one of those technical glitches.
And please, yeah, fill out each one. I don't think you're going to be able to actually submit unless you actually answer each of the 10 questions. So we'll allow a little bit more time here for this one. Okay, we have about 6 responses so far, 7.
Please keep going. This is really the most important part of our evening here for our takeaway.
All right, we got 13, which is, I think, what we had. I'm gonna let anybody who is still filling this out raise their hand, and I'll give a little bit more time, but I think 13 was our number in the last poll, so I think we're pretty good. Don't see any hands raised. All right, I'm gonna end the poll. And I will share the results.
Okay, so pretty evenly split on whether the entire home should be rented or not, and whether that's something we really want to regulate or not. So a little higher percentage, 54% saying, no, that's a low priority. The second one, renting only a primary residence, not a second home, which is what Adam was just describing. Again, pretty evenly split, 54% saying that's a low priority. Number 3, require owner occupancy during the rental. This was San Rafael's solution to community concerns, and that is definitely not something that folks seem much interested in. Number 4, place a limit on the number of rental days per year. So that one actually has 62% people thinking that that's a pretty good idea. And again, we just heard the last speaker say that that's something he would consider if he was going to be renting his property to not overly impact his neighbors. Number 5, limit on the number of guests, usually on a per bedroom basis. Again, pretty split, 54% saying low priority. Number 6, emergency 24-hour contact. Most people supported that, 77%. I think, again, in terms of safety and if there is emergency contact by the police or whatever, or on enforcement, that's probably a pretty decent idea. 7, additional parking required. Again, pretty evenly split, 54% in this case. So one additional person, I guess, said that they should provide some additional parking beyond what the typical single family home would have, which is usually 2 spaces. Posting of guest information, including information about emergency and evacuation routes, et cetera, noise ordinances, parking regulations, trash day. People thought that was a high priority. Again, it allows renters to be hopefully a better neighbor, and also enhances safety. Building or fire inspections required. Again, 62% thought that that was a pretty good idea. And lastly, making sure that there are provisions for folks to register their unit, and then also provisions if there are violations to initiate revocation. And again, just over half said that that was a high priority. So we got some definite mixed results. My sense is we heard from a lot of you this evening, a number of you, saying that you didn't think a real heavy regulatory approach was appropriate, and there really haven't been demonstrated problems in town. And again, what I think we're looking at is, are there potential problems that we should try to anticipate and deal with in advance? But again, this is a first pass, and I think some interesting results. I don't know, Adam, if you have any takeaways from what you're seeing here.
No, other than, obviously this is, as you said, a first pass. I mean, I think we'd like to get additional comments, and hopefully we'll continue to have this information out and available so that people can provide comments on what others think as well. But I really appreciate everybody giving us this information to start with. So that's helpful. So I'm going to stop sharing this results here.
Okay. And then the next screen, if you would.
Oops.
So where we're going from here, Adam said this is not going to be a super fast process. We're not looking to jam this through by any means. We're looking for a second community workshop that will probably be with the Planning Commission, but certainly public, very much invited. And at that point, we'll share the information that we received from tonight, and we'll probably try to sort of focus down and as a staff make some recommendations for approaches that we think might make sense from what we've heard. And again, just looking for feedback, particularly from the Planning Commission as part of the decision-making tree here, in terms of what they think they ultimately would like to recommend to the town council. So if the Planning Commission thinks that a change in the code is warranted, then from that we'll prepare a draft ordinance, and then we would have Planning Commission hearings and town council hearings. Again, Adam said probably in the early fall, I would guess. So
yeah, no, I just say in the meantime, I think please feel free to reach out to myself, my email directly if you want to do that. We have that is, and I don't have it on the screen at the moment. I'm wondering if I can write it somewhere that everybody could see, but it's awolf, AWOLFF at tcmmail.org. Happy to collect comments. We'll be taking all of the comments that we do receive on this issue, as Bob mentioned, to a workshop that we'll be having with the Planning Commission, so that these comments and the information tonight and the comments we get after this meeting will live on and continue to be brought forward through the process. But if you have others that you know are interested in this issue, but were attending to a basketball game perhaps, or some other event, please let us know, or please have them reach out, and we can also figure out ways to run this exercise perhaps with others as well, just to get some additional feedback. So that's all I have to say really at this point in terms of next steps.
I want to thank everybody for taking the time this evening. Again, this is just the beginning of a community conversation here. But I think we accomplished what we were looking for. Really appreciate the input.
Right. So with that, I guess we're going to wrap up tonight. I will open it up for any last questions, maybe or comments that people have this evening. Sorry, somebody's on hearing some feedback here, but we have a little bit more time. So yeah, I see David McPherson. I'm going to ask you to unmute, so please.
Thank you for doing this. I think there was a lot of outreach by the town, and I'd love to see maybe double the number of participants next time. And I look forward to the public hearings in the future.
Thanks for attending, David. Appreciate the comment. Unless there's any other comments, I guess we can wrap up a little bit early. Or questions. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. And we'll be in touch, and you'll be hearing from us on this in the future here shortly. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Take care.
Good night.
Thank you.